friends with benefits. That's a cute term that the people in marketing came up with to sell the kind of behavior that is usually common among mammals like bonobos, hyenas, and rats. Repurpose this behavior for a new target species that the people upstairs insist will be much, much easier to manage if they behave more like, monkeys, dogs, and rats. The problem is that despite the successful attempts to implement widespread availability of contraceptives and engineer a sharp decline in church attendance through constant mockery and social shaming, one of their greatest achievements of all, of course, we can't forget the complete normalization of infanticide. You see, there's still, after all of these achievements, there were still portions of the population that seemed a little resistant to these efforts to undermine the power structure of the family unit, which is absolutely crucial if you want to dissolve the mechanism that people use, the mechanism in which Christian values are preserved and propagated through a society. These values are what always get in your way. That's what's always opposing your plan. There's these Western Christian values. So you have to go after the source. You have to dissolve the mechanism that preserves and propagates this wrong think. Especially if you want to reduce people to one-size-fits-all consumerist debt slaves, individuals who individually all want the exact same things. Exactly the way you tell them they want it. And most importantly, these individuals, they have no real connections with each other. You see, groups are dangerous. A few nonconformists here and there, they don't pose a threat. In fact, they can serve as useful examples to the larger group who will see how isolating it is to be different, how powerless these people are, these loners. But not if they're able to group together. That can't be tolerated. There can't be anything that ties the individuals together. There can only be one bond, one single, unbreakable bond. And that is the bond between all these satellite individuals. The bond between these automatons and the will and the desires of the people upstairs. The most important bond to break, to create these rootless, wandering automatons. The root of all bonds. The foundation that needs cracking. The bond between man and woman. What a marvelous success this project has been in the last few decades. Even the people upstairs are blushing. Who would have imagined that this bond would be so easy to sabotage? Well, the people upstairs knew. After all, their master had showed them exactly how to do it. The bond between Adam and Eve that kept them in paradise was easily undermined simply by manipulating Eve. Their master taught them a long time ago, to get what you want, you don't have to manipulate the men. You simply manipulate the women, and once they're compromised, they'll manipulate the men for you. The people in research, they ran focus groups and discovered that men had the foresight and the reasoning capabilities to see the problems with socially deregulating the sexual marketplace and turning it into a free-for-all. Boys, of course, are a completely different story. boys, not men, are so hopped up on hormones and biologically hardwired to want all the casual monkey sex they can get their hands on. Boys aren't a problem. But boys don't make the rules. Men make the rules. And men instinctively want to protect their women. Especially if they have daughters, they understand they have to preserve the regulation of the marketplace. By making sex this impersonal thing, the same thing as playing a video game with a friend, it ruins women. So the people upstairs were going to have to necessarily first manipulate the women, who would then, once compromised, manipulate the men. If they could pull this off, eventually there wouldn't be any men. You know, once women were on board, the boys with a steady diet of meaningless dopamine without the pesky bonding with women or the reproductive process that often pushed these boys into being men. These boys could just be led around by their testicles for the rest of their lives, no problem, and just exist in this perpetual state of arrested development. The guys down in research, they ran focus group after focus group, and it seemed that even though they'd been wildly successful in their other efforts to manipulate women, into treating their reproductive organs as some kind of malady that needed to be treated with regular medication, and their children as some kind of parasite that had to be violently exterminated with surgical instruments as quickly as possible so they didn't get in the way of their trip to Cancun. There was still a lingering instinct that women seemed to be clinging to. They had this idea that there was something emotionally connecting about sex, which was confusing because they had already jumped on board the feminism train. It didn't make any sense. These girls had been programmed from an early age to believe they were either identical or superior to men. Certainly, they could enjoy sex the same way that men did, with the same detachment. Anything men could do, they could do. It just had to be marketed better and given a catchy name, rebranding. Instead of whoring around, it would be called Friends with Benefits. That just has a much nicer ring than being a complete slut.